When the man entered the warehouse, he saw the woman and her children tied up with rope. The air inside smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and something older. Fear soaked into wooden walls, like mold in the bones of a forgotten house. The woman's head was slumped forward, her hair covering her face in wild, tangled strands. 3 children sat close by her, their wrists bound, their cheeks streaked with dust and silent tears. A 4th child, barely 4 years old, had fallen asleep with her face pressed into her mother's skirt, her tiny body trembling in the cold that crept under the cracks in the walls. The man didn't breathe. His name was Dord, but for most of his life people had just called him Drifter or Ghost. He had no tribe, no land, no home, only a scar across his jaw and a silence that spoke louder than most men's oaths. He hadn't come looking for anyone. He was passing through the burnt valley when he saw the trail of ash leading from the river. Something told him to follow it, something older than logic, perhaps guilt, perhaps fate. And now he stood here, in front of a woman whose hands were turning blue from tight rope, and whose lips moved soundlessly as if she were still trying to pray. He stepped forward. One of the children looked up, a boy, maybe 10 years old, with a swollen eye and torn lip, but his gaze wasn't afraid. It was fierce, like a cub born under siege. He shook his head slightly. No, don't come closer. But Dodd was already moving, fast, silent, like smoke. There was no time to ask who she was, why they had been taken, or what God had abandoned this family here. He pulled his knife from the leather strap under his sleeve and sliced the ropes on the boy first. Then the second girl, then the baby, then finally, the woman. As soon as the ropes fell from her wrists, she collapsed forward. He caught her just before her head hit the ground. Her face was badly bruised. She had been struck across the mouth more than once. Her eyes opened slowly, eyes like mountain ash after a fire, hollow but burning. He whispered, "Can you walk?" She didn't answer with words. She simply stood up, barefoot, shaking, but upright. She gathered her children around her, holding one under each arm. No sound, no panic. Only the brutal, determined silence of a mother whose only instinct was survival. Dodd looked around. There were muddy boot prints in the corner, still wet. Whoever had tied them up wasn't far, maybe minutes away. "We need to leave now," he said. The boy pulled at his sleeve. "There's another girl, my sister. They took her yesterday." Dodd froze. "How old?" 12. A shadow passed through Dodd's face. He had seen what happened to girls that age when taken by men who wore knives for decoration. "I'll find her," he said. "No," the woman rasped suddenly. Her voice was dry but steady. "We all go, or none of us go." Dodd stared at her. This wasn't just about saving what could be saved. This was a mother who had already chosen once in her life to survive. She would not survive again if it meant leaving one behind. He nodded. He helped them out of the warehouse, every step risky. The warehouse was on the edge of the salt range, where the road met the dry river. Nothing but jagged cliffs and dust for miles. But Dodd knew how to disappear. He led them to a cave hidden behind thorns and loose rock. Told them to wait. Gave the boy his second knife. "If anyone comes in, aim for the stomach, twist, then run." The boy didn't blink. He nodded once. Dodd went back alone. He moved like he had when he used to hunt. Like he had when he was not yet tired of the world. He found tracks, drag marks, small footsteps alongside heavier ones. 2 men, 1 girl. He followed them up toward the canyon where no moonlight touched. He found her tied to a wooden post, wrists raw, eyes swollen from crying. Her dress was torn, but she was unharmed. Not because the men had mercy, but because they were waiting for something, or someone. Dodd didn't wait. He didn't speak. He killed the first one with a stone to the back of the head. The second reached for his gun, but found Dodd's blade in his chest before he could pull it. There was no sound, no scream, just a gurgling breath, and then silence. He untied the girl. She stared at him with hollow eyes and whispered, "I knew someone would come. My mother promised." He carried her back to the cave. When her mother saw her, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just fell to her knees and held all 4 of her children at once, her arms trembling under the weight of love and grief. Dodd stood at the cave entrance, watching. The woman looked up at him, finally, and said, "Why did you help us?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then finally, "Because once someone tied my sister to a post, too. And I was too late." No more was said. Outside, the wind howled through the canyons like it had been waiting centuries to carry this story. But inside the cave, for the first time in days, there was warmth, and it had nothing to do with fire. They stayed in the cave for 3 days. Dodd came and went like wind through cracks, silent, fast, never resting more than an hour. He brought food from nearby village stalls, stolen quietly, a goat skin of water from the canyon stream, bandages torn from his own shirt. He never asked their names. They never asked his. But on the 3rd night, as the wind settled and the children finally slept wrapped in one another's arms, the woman spoke. "My name is Zareen." He nodded, quietly. The name did something strange to him, not because it meant anything, but because it sounded like a thing that shouldn't be whispered in a place so full of scars. "My children's names are Luma, Bibi, Adam, and the one you found, Maliha." He turned toward her slowly. The cave was dark, but her voice carried warmth even through the chill. She sat by the fire, her hands rubbing the soles of her daughter's feet to keep the blood flowing. "I didn't thank you properly," she said. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." She looked up at him. "Because men like you don't just appear. They've been through something bad, and still they choose to save instead of destroy." He met her eyes for a heartbeat too long. "Bad," he repeated, more to himself than her. "Yes, that's a light word for it." She tilted her head. "You want to tell me what happened to your sister?" "No." "Then I'll just tell you mine," she said softly. "Maybe it will balance the silence." He said nothing, but didn't walk away. So she told him. Zareen had once been the daughter of a respected tribal elder. Her father had land, goats, honor, but his mistake was trusting his blood. Her uncle had poisoned him slowly over 2 years, and then married her mother, claiming the inheritance for himself. Zareen had been 16 when her first child was born. She had married a leather trader, a quiet man, kind, but not strong enough to survive the politics of tribal greed. He had died after refusing to sell their land. 3 men came with forged papers. They said we owed taxes. They tore up our crops, broke the legs of my oldest goat, tied my husband to a tree and beat him until he couldn't stand. He was dead by morning. Dodd's hands had curled into fists without him realizing. I fled that night with the children, lived by the river, spun wool, carried salt to market. Then last week they came again, said I still owed money. And this time, there was no one left to pay. He looked up. So they tied you up. She nodded. And they took Maliha to punish me, to show the village what happens when a woman defies her own uncle. Dodd's voice came like thunder, muffled under stone. Your uncle did this? Zareen didn't need to answer. Dodd stood up. The firelight flickered over the scars on his forearms, his jaw, his knuckles, each one a memory, a promise, a scar for someone he hadn't saved. Yet in his silence, a storm was building. I know men like your uncle, he said. They dress in robes but walk with vipers. She didn't stop him, because she knew that once a storm begins to gather inside a man like Dodd, only justice can calm it, or blood. That night, he walked out into the cold, not knowing if he would return. Zareen didn't sleep. The children stirred and whimpered in dreams, but she sang quietly to them, old lullabies her mother used to hum when wolves cried outside the window. She did not cry herself. Her eyes had run dry weeks ago. But inside, something hurt so deeply it had no name, only heat and waiting. Before dawn, he returned. His hands were red. His knife was missing. He sat by the fire without speaking, his face more silent than stone. Zareen didn't ask. Only when the sun broke across the mountain's edge did she speak again. "Do you believe in mercy?" Dodd's voice cracked for the first time. "Only when it comes too late." She looked down at her hands. "Then maybe this world doesn't need more men like you." He looked at her sharply. She continued, "Maybe it needs more men who come too early, who don't wait until the worst happens, who show up before the rope burns the wrist, before the girl is taken." Dodd opened his mouth to reply but found no words. She had struck something in him deeper than any blade. Then suddenly, there was shouting outside. The children woke. Zareen pulled them behind her. Dodd stood like a wolf called to war. He listened. 2 voices, maybe 3, armed, coming close. Footsteps over gravel, a dog barking. They had been found. Dodd turned to her, and his voice was low and final. "Take them, through the narrow pass behind the cave. Follow the eagle path. It leads to the old salt caravans. There's a man there, named Sarwar. Tell him I sent you." She shook her head. "Not without you." He put a hand on her shoulder. "You gave me something I thought was gone," he said. "What?" "Belief." Before she could answer, he was already gone, vanishing into the mist like the last hope of a broken land. She ran. With 4 children and shaking legs, she ran through thorns and crags and biting wind. Behind her, the echo of gunfire cracked the morning open. Once, then again, then silence. She didn't stop. Not until the mountain swallowed her into its ancient folds and the road behind turned to dust. The mountain held her like a mother who had lost too many of her children. Zareen moved forward with numb feet, her shawl torn, her hands cut from the thorns that clawed at her every step. The children cried only in silence now, the kind of crying that doesn't reach the mouth, only shivers in the bones. Maliha limped beside her, clinging to her sister's hand. Little Bibi had to be carried. Adam walked behind, eyes scanning the path like a boy grown too fast. It took them 2 days to reach the old salt route, and when they did, there was no caravan, just wind and endless rock, and a single man squatting beside a fire of dried goat, dung, feeding it slowly like a ritual. His eyes were pale, not from age, but from something he had seen long ago and never unseen. "You Sarwar?" Zareen asked, though her voice cracked halfway. The man didn't nod, didn't speak. Just reached for a flask and handed it to the children. Warm milk, then bread, then dried apricots wrapped in a palm leaf. Zareen fell to her knees in front of him. "Dodd sent us," she whispered. At that, Sarwar's eyes narrowed. "You came from the cave?" "Yes." He paused. "He's dead?" Zareen didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she hadn't let herself believe anything else. How else could silence stretch this long? How else could a man like Dodd simply vanish without leaving behind a body or a grave? Sarwar looked out across the dust plains. "He saved me once," took a bullet in his thigh to pull me out of a fire I started myself. That was 15 years ago, and he still never let me pay him back. Zareen looked up. He said you'd help us. I will, Sarwar replied. But you need to understand something. A woman who escapes a tribal punishment with her children. She's not free. She's hunted. Your uncle won't let this shame stand. He'll send word to the valley chiefs, say you seduced a drifter and ran away with stolen gold. Zareen felt the familiar tightness rise in her throat, the pain that always came when truth had no witness and lies had power. What should I do? Sarwar stood slowly. You'll stay here, a week, maybe 2. Then I'll take you across, the southern ridge. There's a shrine in the desert. The old keepers there owe Daud more than a favor. She nodded, though her chest ached with grief she couldn't name yet. That night, the stars came close enough to touch. The mountain wind softened. Sarwar kept watch as the children finally slept without trembling. Zareen lay awake beside the fire, staring into the flames. For the first time in years, she let herself dream. Of land, of mornings without fear, of a life where her daughters wouldn't learn to hide their voices, and of Daud, his silence, his scars, the way he moved like a man who'd stopped running from death and instead invited it to chase him. She remembered the way he'd placed his hand on her shoulder before vanishing, not with ownership, not with farewell, but with a strange kind of reverence, as if he'd seen something in her he'd been searching for in himself. The next morning, a rider arrived. He wore the long robes of a tribal messenger, dust on his beard, a hawk feather tied to his arm. He asked for Sarwar. They spoke in hushed tones. Then Sarwar returned to Zareen with eyes darker than they'd been the night before. He's alive, Sarwar said. Her heart stopped. They caught him, he continued. Your uncle, and the village elders. Zareen stood. Where? In Carrot Fort. They're holding a public trial. They're calling him a thief, a kidnapper, a murderer. They're demanding he confess to crimes he didn't commit. He won't. No, Sarwar agreed. That's the problem. They'll hang him before the week is out. Zareen looked down at her children. Her hands trembled. A part of her had been bracing for death. But this was worse. This was injustice clothed in law, shame pretending to be honor. I have to go, she said. Sarwar grabbed her wrist. If you go back, they'll kill you too. And your children. Your uncle's name is already spreading like fire. He says you ran off with a wanted man, sold your virtue for gold. I don't care what they say, she hissed. He didn't die for me just to be buried by lies. Sarwar studied her, a long moment, then nodded. There's a caravan leaving for Carrot Fort at dawn, he said. They won't recognize you if we dress you as an herb seller, but you'll need to be careful. One wrong word. She was already gathering her things. At sunrise, dressed in worn rags and with her face covered by a dust veil, Zareen boarded the back of a spice cart, headed toward the heart of the desert, and toward the place where the man who saved her life would lose his unless she spoke first. She didn't know what she would say. Only that silence now would be the final betrayal. Carrot Fort stood like a wound carved into the side of the desert, ancient and angry. Its black stone walls held 1,000 years of blood, judgment, and tribal law, and now it held Daud. Zareen had never seen it before, only heard stories, of men dragged through its gates and never walking out, of women accused of dishonor, hung from its northern wall at dawn. No evidence, no defense, just stories turned to verdicts. She clutched the spice satchel on her hip, keeping her eyes low as the caravan passed the outer checkpoint. No one paid her attention. She was just another veiled village woman peddling dried ginger and crushed lavender, but her breath stilled every time a guard glanced her way. Her heart beat not in her chest, but in her throat. By noon, she was inside the inner court. By sundown, she had found the trial. A crowd had gathered, men in dark turbans, elders seated. Beneath the great arch, and at the center, a wooden scaffold rising like a cruel throne. On it stood Daud, wrists chained, shirt torn, face bruised but unbroken. The desert sun hit him hard, yet he stood as if it burned someone else. The elder's voice rang out. "This man is accused of killing a tribal cousin, stealing tribal gold, and defiling a woman who belongs to the honorable bloodline of Malik." Rafi. Zareen stepped forward. She hadn't planned it. Her body moved before her mind caught up. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd as a veiled woman in tattered dress broke the circle of stone. "I speak," she said. The guards rushed forward. One raised a staff, but Daud's voice shattered the stillness. "Stop!" His voice, gravel and iron, bleeding but proud. "She speaks for herself." The head elder raised an eyebrow. "And who is this woman?" Zareen pulled down her veil. Gasps, murmurs. One man cursed under his breath. "I am Zareen, daughter of Zaman Gul, niece of Malik Rafi, widow, mother, and the woman you claim was defiled." She turned to the crowd, her voice shaking but rising, like a storm that had waited too long. "This man saved my life, and my children's lives. He found us tied with ropes, starving, near death, left to rot because I refused to surrender land that was stolen from me. He killed no one that day. He ran, for us, for me, and now you call him a criminal." The elder stood slowly. "If what you say is true, then you admit to traveling alone with a man outside your bloodline. You speak dishonor into your own mouth." Zareen took a step forward. "No, I speak what men like you call dishonor, but what God might call truth." A hushed silence spread. She turned to her uncle. Malik Rafi stood beneath a canopy, robes pristine, rings glinting on his fingers. His face was calm, but his eyes burned. "You stole my land," Zareen said. "You killed my husband. You sent dogs to take my daughters. You tied me like an animal and left me to die. And now you stand here and speak of tribal justice?" Someone in the crowd murmured, "Is this true?" Another, "She was never seen again after her husband's death." Rafi's lips tightened. "This is a mad woman." Zareen raised her voice. "Then ask my children, or are their voices too small for your great court?" She walked to Daud. Her hand brushed his. Even in chains, his fingers gripped hers for a moment that felt like a vow. "I don't care if I live after this," she said, "but if you kill this man, you'll be hanging your last good name with him." The elders whispered. The court stirred. Tribal justice was harsh, but it was also bound to witness. And this woman, veiled in fire, had just thrown the law itself into question. Finally, the eldest of the judges raised his hand. "Unchain him." Rafi shouted, "You'll let a woman's tears free a murderer." The judge turned. "No, we'll let a woman's truth burn through your lies." Guards stepped forward. The chains fell. Daud dropped to his knees, not from weakness, but because his legs had finally been granted peace. The people began to leave in silence, no cheers, no applause, only the quiet unease of a tribe forced to face itself. Zareen and Daud stood beneath the setting sun, dust rising around them like holy smoke. "You were willing to die," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You already did. I was just trying to bring you back." He lowered his head. "I don't deserve this." Zareen touched the side of his face where the bruises had turned yellow and violet. No man who walks back into fire for strangers can say what he deserves. That's not our decision. That's God's. The sun had set behind Carrot Fort, but its shadow lingered long after on the faces of those who had witnessed the trial. Zareen walked beside Daud, away from the black gates, away from the stairs, away from the court that had nearly swallowed them whole. The desert wind picked up behind them like a closing door. They traveled south with the children, walking by night, hiding by day. Sarwar met them near the salt dunes with camels and a promise. There was an old healer's house near, the ruined monastery, abandoned, quiet, far from tribal law. And so, for a time, they lived in the dust of forgotten saints. Zareen ground flour by hand. Daud built walls with stone and sweat. The children laughed again, chased lizards, learned to trap rabbits, and even drew, in the sand, without fear. But peace is not stillness. It has its own sounds. The steady hum of wind through broken windows, the heartbeat of a woman lying awake at night wondering what it means to be safe, and what it means to love someone who never asks for it, because Daud never asked. He spoke little, ate little, slept with one hand always near a knife, not because he feared death, but because some part of him, the old, buried part, still feared life. One evening, as the call of jackals echoed in the ravine, Zareen found him repairing the door. "You still think we're being hunted," she said softly. "I know we are." She watched his hands. Strong, scarred, honest. "And when will you stop running?" He didn't answer, just stared out toward the darkening sky. Zareen stepped closer. "You saved us, Daud. Then I saved you. What more do we owe the past?" He finally looked at her. "It's not about owing. It's about believing it's real." Her voice dropped. "This is real." She placed his hand on her chest, over her heart. It beat steadily under his palm. "Do you feel that?" He nodded. "That's the only proof I can offer." He wanted to speak. She could see it. The words danced on the edge of his mouth. But just as quickly, something broke the stillness. A child's scream. They ran toward the sound. Adam stood at the edge of the well, pointing. "I saw someone. On the ridge, watching." Daud's eyes darkened. Sarwar confirmed it that night. A rider passed through the village 2 days ago. Asked about a woman with 4 children and a man who walks with a slight limp. He paid well. Said he was blood. "Kin to Malik Rafi," Zareen's breath caught. "He's still looking for us?" Sarwar's face was grave. He never stopped. The next morning Daud packed quietly. A rifle, 2 knives, a saddlebag with dried meat and bullets. Zareen stood in the doorway. "You're going after him." He didn't argue. "You can't kill him, Daud. That's what they want. 1 drop of blood, and they'll chase us again, forever." He turned to her. "Then what do I do? Let him come? Let him take another child? Burn our home?" She stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "No, but this time don't go alone." Daud shook his head. "I've always gone alone." Zareen gripped his arm. "That's the problem." He stared at her a long time. Then slowly, quietly, he unbuckled the rifle, dropped it to the floor. "I don't know how to be anything else," he whispered. "You don't have to," she said. "Just stay. Let him come. And when he does, we face him, not with blades, with truth, with everything they fear most. A woman unafraid, a man who walked away from violence, and children who sleep in peace." And so they stayed, waited, watched the hills. And one morning, as the first frost clung to the edges of the well, a rider appeared, alone, wrapped in furs, and carrying a letter in his hand. Daud stepped forward, ready for war. But the rider dismounted, bowed, and held out the note. "From Malik Rafi," he said. His final words. Dodd opened it. One line. You shamed me without spilling blood, so I will die with the same grace. Malik Rafi had taken his own life before. The council stripped him of title and honor. No more hunters came. The tribe moved on. But Dodd and Zareen, they remained. Winter came slowly that year, as if the sky itself had grown tired of storms. The desert wind softened. The days grew shorter. And the house near the ruined monastery no longer echoed with fear, but with laughter. The crackle of firewood and the gentle clinking of spoons against clay bowls. For the first time in what felt like 100 years, Zareen's children slept through the night. Dodd now rose with the morning sun, not to flee, but to fetch water, to check on the goats to mend a fence. He didn't say much, and Zareen didn't need him to. Some silences are not cold. Some silences mean home. One evening, as the horizon melted into gold, Zareen sat on the roof with little Maveen in her lap, brushing her hair with fingers worn, but gentle. Will we stay here forever, Ami? The girl asked. Zareen smiled softly. If God wills it. But where does Dodd go every night after we sleep? She paused, then kissed the child's head. He goes to speak to his ghosts, and every night, one of them leaves. Below them, Dodd sat near the fire pit, sharpening a blade not for war, but for carving. He'd begun shaping wood, strange, beautiful things, a flute, a tiny box for Adam's pebbles, a comb for Zareen, and once, silently without a word, he placed in her hand a tiny carved bird, its wings open as if caught, mid-flight. No cage? She asked gently. He had shaken his head. Some things are meant to fly. Zareen knew then, what she had suspected all along, that the man before her was not healed, not yet. But he was healing, and not because she fixed him, because he chose to stay. One morning, word arrived by a merchant from Karat Fort. Malik Rafi's estate had been dissolved, his lands auctioned, his name erased from the tribal register, but tucked inside the scroll was a deed, signed, stamped, legal. The land he stole from Zareen returned to her name. She stared at it for a long time, then quietly walked outside and handed it to Dodd. This is justice, she said. He took it, looked at it, then into her eyes. No, he replied. This is mercy dressed as justice. A man like him doesn't give back land because he regrets. He gives it because he knows he's already lost something greater. Zareen watched him for a moment. You think he feared you? Dodd shook his head. No, he feared what I became, with you. A man who can't be owned by his past. That night, a celebration. Simple, honest. No drums, no guests. Just bread, dates, and a new song Sarwar sang beside the fire. One that told the story of a widow left to die, and the man who found her tied in a warehouse, only to be saved himself. The story spread, quietly, across villages, across dunes. They said a ghost had turned into a guardian, that a mother had fought an elder with nothing but her voice. That love, when bound in truth, could survive even the darkest betrayal. Years passed. Dodd never left again. He built homes for other orphans. Trained young boys in carpentry, not combat. Never touched a rifle again. And when asked once by a boy with wide eyes and a curious heart, "Were you ever a bandit, Master Dodd?" He smiled. For a time. But then I met someone who tied me to a different path. And those ropes, I never wanted to escape. As for Zareen, she planted wheat where graves once stood, and every spring when the first shoots rose from the earth, she whispered to them, "Grow tall, no one will bury us again."